Exercise 38, Topic 1. Listen to a short conversation, then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to a conversation between two students.
It doesn't seem right that I have to take Earth Science 100.
Why not? I took it, and it's really an interesting course.
I know. It's just that I took so many science courses in high school, I don't think I'll learn anything new. But I have to take it because it's a prerequisite for Environmental Science 300, and that's a required course for my major. So you see my problem?
Well, let's think about this. If you take the prerequisite, you'll get credit for it, and the course will be an easy A, right?
I guess so.
Then if I were you, I'd just take Earth Science 100 as a sort of review. Then take Environmental Science 300 next semester. You could spend more time on your other classes.
Yeah, I could do that.
Or you could talk to the professor, the environmental science professor, You could just ask for an exception to the prerequisite. Tell him you'll take a test or something to prove that you already know the material.
Could the professor do that?
Absolutely. It's his class, and he can allow anyone he wants to in it.
Describe the woman's problem and the two suggestions that the man makes about how to handle it. What do you think the woman should do and why?
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
The woman has a lot of background in earth science from high school courses, but she's being required to take an introductory earth science course as a prerequisite for an environmental science course that's on her major program plan. The man suggests that she take the earth science anyway because it'll be easy and she'll probably get an A in it. He points out that she can spend more time on other courses because she won't need to spend much time on the earth science. But when she seems reluctant to do that, he recommends that she speak with the professor to request special permission to take Environmental Science 300 without the prerequisite. She already understands the material, so he tells her that she could offer to take a test. I think the woman should speak with the professor because if she gets permission, then she can take another course that will teach her something new instead of spending time and money on reviewing material she already knows.
Exercise 38, Topic 2. Listen to a short conversation. Then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to a conversation between two students.
We have to make a group presentation in my economics class, and you know how I feel about standing up in front of a group.
Yeah, I know. You always do a great job, though.
Thanks, but I get so stressed out.
Well, have you tried relaxation techniques, like deep breathing or closing your eyes and visualizing success? I used to go through my entire presentation in my head, and I even tried to imagine everyone applauding at the end.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I'd be very good at that. Maybe the deep breathing, though.
Okay, then. You could just avoid being the presenter.
That sounds good. How do I do that?
Easy. Just offer to do the preparation. You know, like the handouts and overheads. In an economics presentation, you must have at least one chart to present.
Actually, we have 4 of them.
You see? Then let someone else do the talking. There's got to be someone in your group who enjoys being up front and center. Just so the professor knows that you did your part, and you can take care of that by handing in a list of the presenters and their responsibilities.
Describe the man's problem and the 2 suggestions that the woman makes about how to handle it. What do you think the man should do, and why?
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
The man's problem is that he's concerned about making a presentation in his economics class because of his fear of speaking in front of a group. One suggestion that the woman makes is for the man to try relaxation techniques like visualization and deep breathing before he makes the presentation. Another suggestion is to take responsibility for preparing the visual materials like handouts, charts, and overheads, and then ask another group member to speak in front of the class. But she tells him to be certain that the professor knows he's done his share of the work by including the names of the group members and their responsibilities as part of the material they submit. Well, I think that the man should try to overcome his problem by taking the opportunity to do some of the presenting in the class. By avoiding it, he isn't making much progress.
Exercise 39, Topic 1. Listen to part of a lecture. Then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a botany class. The professor is discussing flowering plants.
Flowering plants have traditionally been divided into 2 major classes, dicots and monocots. The actual basis for the distinction is the number of cotyledons. Remember, cotyledons are the seed leaves that the embryo produces. In monocots, there is a single seed leaf, and in dicots, there are 2 seed leaves. Although there are a number of other characteristics that distinguish them, 2 are particularly useful. The number of flower parts and the leaf vein patterns are different in the 2 classes. The petals of the flowers, or other flower parts, are divisible by 3 in monocots, whereas they are divisible by 4 or 5 in dicots. And a parallel leaf structure is usual in monocots, but dicots tend to have numerous auxiliary veins that connect the major veining. That seems relatively straightforward then, right? Wrong. Botanists are not always in agreement regarding several families of flowering plants because they have a combination of characteristics that don't fit neatly into the classifications. For example, water lilies have leaf veining like dicots, but it appears that there is only a single seed leaf, as would be expected in a monocot. So how can this happen? Well, we believe that the two groups may actually have a shared ancestor, a basic group probably more similar to the dicots, from which the monocots have evolved. This means that no one characteristic of a flowering plant, the number of flower parts, leaf veining, or even the number of seed leaves, is going to be sufficient to identify it as either a monocot or a dicot.
Referring to the main points and examples from the lecture, describe the two general groups of flowering plants. Then explain the problem for classification that the professor presents.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
Dicots and monocots are the two major classes of flowering plants. Basically, a monocot has one seed leaf and a dicot has two. In monocots, the number of petals can be divided evenly by 3, but in dicots, the number can be divided evenly by 4 or 5. Also, monocots have parallel veins in their leaves, but dicots have, numerous veins with connecting patterns. Now, the problem in classification is that sometimes the characteristics overlap. The professor's example is the water lily, which has characteristics from both the monocot and the dicot. The professor explains that the two classifications may have descended from a common ancestor, and that makes classification of a plant on the basis of any one characteristic. That one characteristic is insufficient to identify it as either a monocot or a dicot.
Exercise 39, Topic 2. Listen to part of a lecture, then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to part of a lecture in an engineering class. The professor is discussing bridge construction.
Okay, let's talk about bridge construction, specifically arch bridges and suspension bridges. Arch bridges have been a standard for bridge construction since ancient times because they are very stable structures. In an arch, the force of the load is carried outward from the top to the ends of the arch, where abutments prevent the ends from pulling apart. So you see, an arch bridge can be designed so that no part of it has to withstand tension. Another advantage of arch bridges is the fact that they can be constructed from such a wide variety of materials, including stone, brick, timber, cast iron, steel, or reinforced concrete. It's also adaptable. The deck can be propped above the arch or hung below the arch. One major disadvantage of the arch bridge, though, the bridge is completely unstable until the two spans meet in the middle. so that can make an arch bridge a little tricky to build. Now, a suspension bridge consists of a deck suspended from cables. The two largest cables, or main cables, are hung from towers with the cable ends buried in huge concrete blocks or rock called anchorages. The cables support the weight of the bridge and transfer the load to the anchorages and the towers. Suspension bridges are considered aesthetically beautiful, and because they are relatively light and strong, they can be used for the longest spans. The cables, usually of high tensile wire, can support an immense weight, but the design does have the disadvantage of potential bending in the roadway. And because suspension bridges are light and flexible, wind is always a serious concern.
Referring to the main points and examples from the lecture, describe the two types of bridge construction presented by the professor. Then explain the specific advantages and disadvantages of each type.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
The professor describes two types of bridges, the arch bridge and the suspension bridge. Arch bridges are very stable because the weight is distributed from the top to the ends of the arch where abutments keep the ends from separating. In addition to stability, an advantage of arch bridges is that they can be constructed from many different materials, like wood, steel, stone, brick, or concrete. The problem is that an arch is difficult to build because it's unstable until the middle span is complete. Now, suspension bridges, they have a deck suspended from cables that are hung from towers. So the cables support the weight and distribute the load to anchorages of concrete or rock and to the towers as well. Suspension bridges are beautiful, and they're light and strong, which makes them appropriate choices for the longest spans. The problem is that the deck of a suspension bridge may bend, and they're not appropriate for very windy areas.
Exercise 40, Topic 1. Listen to part of a lecture. Then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to part of a lecture in an anatomy class. The professor is discussing the functions of the liver.
So that brings us to our discussion of the liver, the largest internal organ in the human body. As you already know, it's part of the digestive system, and it performs more than 500 functions. Today we'll talk about the three primary functions of the liver. First, the liver functions as a storage system. The liver stores energy in the form of glycogen, which is made from a type of sugar called glucose. When the glucose levels in the blood are high, the liver uses the glucose to create glycogen and stores it as energy that can be used later. When the glucose level in the blood falls below the minimum level, the liver changes glycogen into glucose for energy. The liver also stores essential vitamins such as A, D, K, and the B vitamins, all of which are critical to maintain good health. In addition to storing energy and vitamins, the liver produces essential chemicals, including important proteins like albumin, which retains calcium and regulates the movement of water from the bloodstream to the tissues, and globin, which is key to maintaining the immune system, and cholesterol, an important part of the cell membrane which is used to transport fats in the blood to tissues in the body. All right, the last crucial function of the liver is to help eliminate toxic substances such as alcohol and drugs from the bloodstream. To clear these harmful substances, the liver absorbs them, then chemically alters them, and finally excretes them into bile. And the bile works its way out of the system through the small intestine of the digestive tract.
Referring to the main points and examples from the lecture, describe the three basic functions of the liver presented by the professor.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
The liver has more than 500 functions, but the professor concentrates on 3. First, the liver is used as a storage system. The liver regulates the glucose levels in the blood, and when it's too high, the liver converts glucose into glycogen and stores it as energy for later use. When the glucose level's too low, it changes the glycogen back into glucose for energy. The liver also stores vitamins A, B, D, and K. Second, the liver is a chemical system. It produces essential proteins, proteins that transport water and fats from the blood to tissues in the body. And they also support the immune system. Third, the liver eliminates toxic material from the blood. For example, drugs and alcohol. The liver absorbs them and changes their chemical composition and excretes them into bile that gets eliminated through the small intestine.
Exercise 40, Topic 2. Listen to part of a lecture, then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class. The professor is discussing how behavior can be predicted.
In addition to describing behavior, psychologists try to predict future performance. We do this by designing studies that determine relationships between the behavior that we expect with the behavior that we can actually record. We use a statistical measurement called a correlation to tell us whether two variables, like perhaps two test scores, whether they vary together in the same way. For example, studies have shown a positive correlation between a student's performance on the SAT, that's the Scholastic Aptitude Test, and the same student's performance in college courses. It's a positive correlation because the higher the score on the SAT, the better we can expect the college grades to be. But what about a negative correlation? Well, other studies suggest that getting a lot of sleep the night before taking the SAT will result in fewer errors on the verbal section. So in a negative correlation like that, the variables move in the opposite direction. The more hours sleep, the fewer verbal errors. Now, that's all well and good, but the problem occurs when we try to understand why correlations exist. That gets us into causality. You see, there are so many potentially uncontrolled or unknown factors that the two variables we are studying may appear to be connected, but they may both be responding to a common third variable. Let's go back to the SAT verbal example. What if the students who slept well the night before the SAT were all very intelligent, or were more prepared for the verbal section, or by chance, many words that they already knew showed up on the exam? Then the real cause wouldn't be the sleep at all.
Referring to the main points and examples from the lecture, describe two types of research correlations that the professor presents. Then explain causality.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
A correlation indicates whether two variables correspond. I mean, whether they vary in the same way. The professor uses the example of students' scores on the SAT and their performances in college to demonstrate a positive correlation. If a student has a high SAT score, we can expect good grades in college. The variables move in the same direction. The professor uses the example of getting a good night's sleep before taking the SAT and the number of incorrect answers on the verbal section. That's an example of a negative correlation. If a student gets a good night's sleep, we can expect fewer errors. The variables move in opposite directions. But even when a correlation can be shown, we don't know the cause. The two variables could be affected by a third factor they have in common. As an example, the students in the study might be more prepared for the verbal section and would have performed well whether they were rested or not.
This is the end of the speaking exercises. Remember, you are improving your English. Continue to work toward your goal.
This is the script for the writing exercises. During each exercise, you will respond to a lecture and a textbook passage. You may take notes as you listen. The directions for each exercise, the textbook passages, and the questions are printed in the book, but the lectures will be spoken. Ready? Let's begin. Exercise 92. Academic Topics. Summaries of textbooks and lectures. Now listen to a professor's response to the textbook passage.
Today we're going to talk about the Rosenhan study, which is probably the classic example of the effect that labeling has on the diagnosis and treatment of psychiatric disorders. The purpose of the study was to determine how the initial diagnosis of schizophrenia, how that label would affect the treatment of patients who were not suffering from the disorder. Rosenhan and his team were admitted separately to several different psychiatric hospitals with the reported symptom of hearing voices. In reality, all of the investigators were completely normal, but because of the reported symptom, they were identified and labeled as schizophrenic. After their admission, all of the investigators behaved normally. Nevertheless, their behavior was interpreted by the healthcare professionals as symptomatic of the disorder in their original diagnosis. So it had to be the expectation that influenced the staff. Investigators remained in the hospitals for as long as 2 months without being detected. Interestingly enough, the other patients seemed to sense that the investigators were not really ill. In fact, several patients confronted them. They asked whether they might be journalists or professors. But the hospital staff did not question the original diagnosis and discharged the investigators with a diagnosis of schizophrenia in remission, that is, not active at the moment. The Rosenhan study is important because it suggests that labels can create expectations, and expectations can influence treatment even in the absence of symptoms.
Exercise 93. Academic Topics. Summaries of textbooks and lectures. Now listen to a professor's response to the textbook passage.
Using the basic technique pioneered by Fonts, Dr. Elizabeth Spelke, a professor at Harvard University, has developed a large number of experiments with preferential staring. Remember, that's the tendency of infants to look at something that's new or surprising for a longer period of time. So, she uses preferential staring to assess the general knowledge that infants have without benefit of prior experience. And she generalizes her conclusions to speculate about the basic cognitive skills with which humans are born, those which distinguish humans as a species. According to Spelke, neuronal modules must be in place at birth, and their presence must allow babies to quickly build mental representations of people, familiar objects, spatial and numerical relationships. This innate core knowledge explains how children are able to learn and organize their world at such a rapid rate. According to Spelke, the foundation for human learning is part of the nature of human beings. As you might imagine, Spelke's work is used as an argument for heredity in the continuing discussion about the relative importance of heredity and environment. She asserts that the origin of human knowledge is a fundamentally human legacy.
Exercise 94. Academic Topics. Summaries of textbooks and lectures. Now listen to a professor's response to the textbook passage.
Whales and other mammals who inhabit the ocean have been problematic in the context of evolutionary theories. Since they breathe air, we can't classify them as fish, but they have adapted themselves to life in the ocean. So how did that happen? The most widely accepted explanation has been that whales must have evolved from land animals that migrated into the water for some pressing environmental reason. This was highly speculative until the discovery of fossils that chronicled a number of intermediary stages from land animals to whales, including whale-like creatures with tiny appendages similar to legs and feet. It's now generally agreed that whales must have descended from mammals, and furthermore that these mammals lived about 50 million years ago, and I think that's pretty amazing. Now, the question is, which mammals were the ancestors of the whale? So, using DNA analysis, we see that segments of non-coding DNA are shared by the whale and the hippopotamus, but not by the whale and other close relatives of the hippo, like giraffes, camels, and pigs. Although the premise still needs further study, there's quite a bit of support for the Whippo hypothesis. Although they may not look like cousins, whales and hippos may be closely related.
Exercise 95. Academic Topics. Summaries of textbooks and lectures. Now listen to a professor's response to the textbook passage.
Of course, we must give credit to Daniel Coleman for his valuable contribution to the field of psychology. Clearly, it is a good service to popularize concepts so that the general public can understand and use what we're learning in the field of psychology. In the case of emotional intelligence, companies have taken a hard look at IQ testing as a basis for hiring employees, and schools have begun to rethink the emphasis that has been placed on standardized testing. However, there are 3 areas in Coleman's work that trouble me. First, very little credit is given to the original psychologists who put forward the notion of emotional intelligence. I do not, by the way, blame Coleman for this oversight. Rather, the media seems to have been responsible for identifying the term almost exclusively, with Coleman at the expense of such early psychologists as Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer. Okay, another concern is that Coleman has used the term so broadly, interchanging it with related but not identical terms, such as emotional literacy, emotional skills, emotional health, and even emotional competency. Finally, and this is probably the most serious criticism, Coleman fails to refer to and cite research over many years in the area of personality studies. Instead, he appears to uphold personal beliefs about what constitutes emotional intelligence, ignoring the large body of empirical research available to support or refute some of the specific claims he makes about the relative importance of EI as compared with IQ or other measures.
Exercise 96. Academic Topics. Summaries of textbooks and lectures. Now listen to a professor's response to the textbook passage.
Although I agree for the most part with the information found in your textbook, I am disturbed by the fact that the authors focus almost exclusively on the geographical and geological changes brought about by shifting sea levels. In addition to these, and arguably of equal or more importance, are the serious effects on the organisms that live in the littoral zone and adapt to the fluctuating sea levels. Whether the changes are abrupt or gradual, organisms must adjust to new conditions as the water recedes and exposes their habitat to the air, or creates turbulence in the water where rough waves can dislodge them and even carry them out of the habitat in which they can survive. Water temperature and the levels of salinity in tide pools also vary with the changes in the littoral zone. And this is serious when we consider that even a few degrees or a slight change in the salt content can mean that an entire species will be extinguished. So, I invite you to think about the repercussions of the various geographical changes on the total environment, including the millions of species that inhabit the littoral zones throughout the world.
Exercise 97. Academic Topics. Summaries of textbooks and lectures. Now listen to a professor's response to the textbook passage.
Although the ecological and the societal interpretations of the Pearl are interesting, I think that Steinbeck had a more personal reason for writing it. Remember that he wrote this novella after he had been awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and had achieved both fame and fortune as a writer. Like Kino, the protagonist of The Pearl, Steinbeck is trying to reconcile his new position in society with his previous life as an impoverished artist. Although the fisherman had dreamed that peace and happiness could be bought with the pearl, he realizes that these spiritual gifts are beyond price. They cannot be purchased. Perhaps Steinbeck is somewhat autobiographical when he depicts Kino's rise to prominence and prosperity and the disillusionment that follows. Success had provided material wealth and luxury, but it had come with a price. Steinbeck was struggling with disappointing relationships and alcoholism. His spiritual life had declined as his material wealth increased. So, I think the work can be interpreted as an allegory of human desires, the vanity of material wealth, and the struggle between good and evil that Steinbeck himself was facing. As he writes in the introduction, "If the story is a parable, perhaps everyone takes his own meaning from it and reads his own life into it. Precisely this latitude for personal interpretation within the universal themes gives the pearl such enduring appeal and permits us to speculate about Steinbeck himself."
Exercise 98. Academic Topics. Summaries of textbooks and lectures. Now listen to a professor's response to the textbook passage.
So why did the humans in the Allen experiment actually increase the level of stress on the part of the subjects? Well, several ideas come to mind. For one thing, the human companions may actually have felt stress for the subjects and may have transmitted their higher stress levels to the subjects. A friend might want the subject to succeed at the task, and the subject might sense that. So their presence might increase the stress already present in the situation. In other words, the subject may have felt more pressure to do well instead of feeling support for completing the task. Or it's possible that the subjects were embarrassed because they feared that their performance might be evaluated by their friends, and failure, not completing the task correctly, that could cause them to risk losing some of the respect that had been built into their relationship. Clearly, a pet is non-judgmental about mathematical ability, whereas a human friend might register disappointment or criticism, or the subject might perceive criticism even when none existed. In a related follow-up study in which the subjects were asked to respond to the stress that they had felt during the task, several women mentioned the fact that, here, let me read this, that dogs don't get angry, dogs don't trade in their owners for new friends, and dogs don't stop loving their owners if they aren't successful. According to Allen, the data doesn't reveal exactly why the dogs provided greater support, but it's persuasive as to the value of pets in the lives of their owners when it's necessary to cope with stressful situations.
Exercise 99. Academic Topics. Summaries of textbooks and lectures. Now listen to a professor's response to the textbook passage.
Well, you've read about some of the perceived disadvantages of telecommuting. Now, let's look at some of the advantages that one company found when they surveyed employees who had elected to work from their computers at home for 2 hours at the beginning of every day. After trying a partial telecommuting schedule for 4 months, participating employees at International Box Corporation reported a marked decrease in job-related stress due to traditional commuting. By working at home from 8 in the morning until 10 o'clock mid-morning, employees noticed that they were able to avoid the overcrowded buses and trains at peak hours of use, and they didn't have to drive on the freeways at rush hour. A significant segment of the employees responding to the survey cited worrying about being late to work as a primary concern before the telecommuting option. According to those who expressed this concern, driving home during rush hour is less stressful than driving to work in the morning because there's an element of choice about when to leave and less pressure to arrive punctually. Some participants mentioned the cost of commuting by car as a reason to use a full-time telecommuting option, should the company decide to implement one. Another finding was that telecommuting, even part-time, seemed to influence the degree of job satisfaction on the part of participating employees. Why? Because they felt that they had more control over their time than they had experienced before the telecommuting schedule was instituted. And even though some of the employees actually worked longer than the required 2 hours from their home computers, they still reported a more positive attitude about their work. One reason that appeared frequently in the responses was that they enjoyed the quiet environment and the opportunity to dress casually during the early morning hours. Finally, the company discovered that the telecommuters were actually more productive as compared with a similar group of employees who worked on the regular 8 to 5 schedule at the office. Employees cited the advantage of an extended period of time to focus on projects that required concentration without the usual interruptions that usually occurred in the office, such as telephones ringing and colleagues appearing at the door. In fact, the most commonly mentioned activity for the telecommuting hours seemed to be report writing and special projects. Any questions?
Exercise 100. Academic topics. Summaries of textbooks and lectures. Now listen to a professor's response to the textbook passage.
Let's consider the question about whether gifts can ever be considered voluntary and without compensation, like the definition that we find in an English language dictionary. Although we claim that in mainstream American culture, gift-giving is devalued when there are obligations attached to the gift, let's look more closely at that assumption. Are gifts really voluntary in modern American society? Or ultimately, do all gifts originate as social obligations with the potential for reciprocity? If we look at major social events in the United States, the kind to which invitations are sent, say a child's birthday party or a wedding, doesn't the invitation imply that a gift is required? And if so, is the act truly voluntary? For example, if your child receives an invitation to a birthday party at a classmate's home, and if you send a nice gift, well, isn't it likely that when the time comes for a birthday party for your child, you'll send an invitation to that classmate, and isn't it true that you'll expect a gift of more or less equal value? And what if the classmate isn't able to attend your child's party? Won't you expect a gift to be delivered anyway? Why would you feel this way if gift-giving were voluntary, with no obligation attached? Instead of buying into public declarations and published definitions, we need to study our own culture as closely as we study what anthropologists have traditionally considered the more exotic cultures. By scrutinizing our history and literature, and by questioning the assumptions behind our own social actions, we position ourselves for a more honest appraisal of who we are and how our values intersect with the activities of our daily lives. In other words, we begin to understand our own culture. Ask yourself, why are you embarrassed by an expensive gift? Why do you feel uncomfortable accepting it? Is it because you know that along with the gift is the expectation that a gift should be reciprocated? Do you feel obligated to return an equally impressive gift? And what if your circumstances don't permit you to do so? In that case, is the gift a problem? If so, then it isn't only reciprocity that defines gift-giving in America, but also parity. I mean, keeping an accounting of the value of gifts so that equal exchanges are given at the appropriate times. Now consider this. Recognition can also be traded, as sociologist Warren Hagstrom has pointed out. Among my own subculture, academics, we pay careful attention to citations and acknowledgments of each other's works in an effort to extend and benefit from our gift-giving networks. I mean, the citation is our gift, and if it's a highly regarded colleague in the field, how different are these citations from the Kula gifts in New Guinea?
This is the end of the writing exercises. Remember, you have learned a lot. You are doing your best.
PBT Model Test Scripts for the Listening Comprehension section. Section 1. In this section of the test, you will have an opportunity to demonstrate your ability to understand conversations and talks in English. There are 3 parts to this section with special directions for each part. Answer all the questions on the basis of what is stated or implied by the speakers in this test. When you take the actual TOEFL test, you will not be allowed to take notes or write in your test book. Try to work on this model test in the same way. Part A. Directions. In Part A, you will hear short conversations between two people. After each conversation, you will hear a question about the conversation. The conversations and questions will not be repeated. After you hear a question, read the 4 possible answers in your book and choose the best answer. Then, on your answer sheet, find the number of the question and fill in the space that corresponds to the letter of the answer you have chosen. Number 1.
You'd better take the car to the garage from now on. They charged me $75 for a few minor repairs.
That's not too bad.
What does the man mean? Number 2.
The International Students Association is having a party Saturday night. Can you come, or do you have to work at the hospital?
I wish I could.
What will the woman probably do? Number 3.
I think that the game starts at 8.
Good. We have just enough time to get there.
What will the speakers probably do? Number 4.
What did you do after you lost your passport?
I went to see the foreign student advisor, and he reported it to the passport office in Washington.
What did the man do after he lost his passport? Number 5.
If you don't have an account here, I can't cash your check. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is.
Well, thanks a lot. You're a big help.
What does the woman mean? Number 6.
I'm not sure what Dr. Tyler wants us to do.
If I were you, I'd write a rough draft and ask Dr. Tyler to look at it.
What does the woman suggest the man do? Number 7.
Dr. Clark is the only one teaching statistics this term.
You mean we have to put up with her for another semester?
What does the woman mean? Number 8.
Do you think that you can have these shirts finished by Friday morning?
I'm sorry. I couldn't possibly get them done by then. Saturday afternoon would be the earliest that you could have them.
What does the woman say about the shirts? Number 9.
The music and the flowers are lovely.
Yes. I hope that the food is good.
What kind of place are the speakers probably talking about? Number 10.
Hello, Anne. This is Larry at the office. Is Fred at home?
No, Larry. He's in class now. He'll be home for lunch, though.
What do we know about Fred? Number 11.
When does the next bus leave for New York?
Buses leave for New York every half hour. You just missed the 9:30 bus by 5 minutes.
What will the man probably do? Number 12.
Did we have an assignment for Monday? I don't have anything written down.
Nothing to read in the textbook, but we have to see a movie and write a paragraph about it.
What are the speakers discussing? Number 13.
Make 30 copies for me and 20 copies for Mr. Brown.
As soon as I make the final corrections on the original.
What is the woman probably going to do? Number 14.
Excuse me, are you Sally Harrison's sister?
No, I'm not. I'm her cousin.
What had the man assumed about the woman? Number 15.
I can't find my pen. It was right here on the desk yesterday, and now it's gone. Have you seen it?
Yes, I put it in the desk drawer.
What is the woman's problem? Number 16.
When is John coming?
Well, he said he'd be here at 8:30, but if I know him, it will be at least 9 o'clock.
What does the man imply about John? Number 17.
I suppose we should look for a bigger house, but I don't see how we can afford one right now.
If only we hadn't spent so much money on our vacation this year.
What does the woman mean? Number 18.
Did you see Jack's presentation?
Yes, what happened? He didn't seem to know up from down.
What does the woman imply about Jack? Number 19.
Shall I send out the invitations?
Let's hold off on that until I can talk to Janet.
What does the man mean? Number 20.
How's the baby? Is she walking yet?
Oh, yes. I can't keep up with her.
What does the woman mean? Number 21.
How is your experiment coming along?
It's finished, but it didn't turn out quite like I thought it would.
What does the man mean? Number 22.
Barbara sure likes to talk on the phone.
If only she liked her classes as well.
What does the man imply about Barbara? Number 23.
My allergies are really bothering me. I guess I'll have to go to the doctor.
If I were you, I'd try some over-the-counter medications first. They usually do the job.
What does the man suggest the woman do? Number 24.
What did you decide about the scholarship? Did you fill out the application?
I'm going to give it all I've got.
What does the woman mean? Number 25.
Hello, Anne. This is Robert.
Oh, hi, Robert. I was just about to call you.
What does the woman mean? Number 26.
Could I have a few more minutes to finish?
I'm afraid not. It's a timed test.
What does the woman mean? Number 27.
The best part is I can use my roommate's book.
I'm not so sure about that. I think they're using a different book this semester.
What does the man imply? Number 28.
I'm going to get Sally a bike for Christmas.
Are you sure she'd like one?
What does the woman imply? Number 29.
Carol needs a ride downtown, and I said you'd take her.
Oh, no. Please say you didn't.
What can be inferred about the man? Number 30.
I just can't get the answer to this problem. I've been working on it for 3 hours.
Maybe you should get some rest and try it again later.
What does the woman suggest that the man do? This is the end of Part A. Part B. Directions. In this part of the test, you will hear longer conversations. After each conversation, you will hear several questions. The conversations and questions will not be repeated. After you hear a question, read the 4 possible answers in your book and choose the best answer. Then, on your answer sheet, find the number of the question and fill in the space that corresponds to the letter of the answer you have chosen. Remember, you are not allowed to take notes or write on your test pages. Questions 31 through 34. Listen to a class discussion. It seems to me that the question is not whether the metric system should be introduced in the United States, but rather how it should be introduced.
I think that it should be done gradually to give everyone enough time to adjust.
Yes. Perhaps we could even have 2 systems for a while. I mean, we could keep the English system and use metrics as an optional system.
That's what they seem to be doing. When you go to the grocery store, look at the labels on the cans and packages. They are marked in both ounces and grams.
Right, I've noticed that too. And the weather reporters on radio and TV give the temperature readings in both degrees Fahrenheit and degrees Celsius now.
Some road signs have the distances marked in both miles and kilometers, especially on the interstate highways. What do you think, Professor Baker?
Well, I agree that a gradual adoption is better for those of us who have already been exposed to the English system of measurement. But I would favor teaching only metrics in the elementary schools.
I see your point. It might be confusing to introduce two systems at the same time.
Number 31. What is the topic under discussion? Number 32. What changes in measurement in the United States have the students observed? Number 33. What was Professor Baker's opinion? Number 34. Which word best describes Professor Baker's attitude toward his students? Questions 35 through 38. Listen to a telephone call to a travel agent.
Hi, this is Roger Jackson. I'm calling to make a reservation for a flight from Houston to Atlanta.
Yes, Mr. Jackson. And what day would you like to travel?
Oh, not until next month. I want to leave on May 15th and return on May 19th. I thought maybe if I called in advance, I could get a better fare.
Yes, you can. But if you stay over Saturday night and return on Sunday, May 20th, the ticket will be even cheaper.
Really? How much cheaper?
Almost $50.
But I would have an extra night in a hotel. No, that's okay. I'll just keep it for May 19th.
All right. Do you have a seating preference?
I'd rather have a window seat.
Good. There is one available. And do you want me to mail these tickets, or will you pick them up?
I'll pick them up. When can I have them?
Any time after 2 o'clock.
Great.
Number 35. What is the main purpose of the telephone call? Number 36. What does the woman suggest? Number 37. What does the man decide to do? Number 38. What will the man probably do? This is the end of Part B. Part C. Directions. In this part of the test, you will hear several short talks. After each talk, you will hear some questions. The talks and questions will not be repeated. After you hear a question, read the 4 possible answers in your book and choose the best answer. Then, on your answer sheet, find the number of the question and fill in the space that corresponds to the letter of the answer you have chosen. Questions 39 through 42. Listen to Breakthroughs in Science, a weekly radio program.
Since the National Aeronautical and Space Administration was established in 1961, NASA has been engaged in an extensive research effort, which in cooperation with private industry has transferred technology to the international marketplace. Hundreds of everyday products can be traced back to the space mission, including cordless electrical tools, airtight food packaging, water purification systems, and even scratch coating for eyeglasses. In addition, many advances in medical technology can be traced back to NASA laboratories. First used to detect flaws in spacecraft, ultrasound is now standard equipment in almost every hospital for diagnosis and assessment of injuries and disease. Equipment first used by NASA to transmit images from space to Earth is used to assist in cardiac imaging, and lasers first used to test satellites are now used in surgical procedures. Under-the-skin implants for the continuous infusion of drugs and small pacemakers to regulate the heart were originally designed to monitor the physical condition of astronauts in space. Finally, with the help of images that were obtained during space missions and NASA technology, archaeologists have been able to explore the Earth. Cities lost under desert sands have been located and rediscovered, and the sea floor has been mapped using photographs from outer space.
Number 39. What is the talk mainly about? Number 40. Which of the products listed are not mentioned as part of the technology development for space missions? Number 41. According to the speaker, why did NASA develop medical equipment? Number 42. Why does the speaker mention archaeology? Questions 43 through 46. Listen to a talk by a tour guide on a bus.
The first permanent settlement was made at this site in 1776, when a Spanish military post was established on the end of that peninsula. During the same year, some Franciscan fathers founded the Mission San Francisco de Asís on a hill above the post. A trail was cleared from the military post to the mission, and about halfway between the two, a station was established for travelers called Yerba Buena, which means good herbs. For 13 years, the village had fewer than 100 inhabitants, but in 1848, with the discovery of gold, the population grew to 10,000. That same year, the name was changed from Yerba Buena to San Francisco. By 1862, telegraph communications linked San Francisco with eastern cities, and by 1869, the first transcontinental railroad connected the Pacific coast with the Atlantic seaboard. Today, San Francisco has a population of almost 3 million. It is the financial center of the West and serves as the terminus for trans-Pacific steamship lines and air traffic. The Port of San Francisco, which is almost 18 miles long, handles between 5 and 6 million tons of cargo annually. And now, if you will look to your right, you should just be able to see the Golden Gate Bridge. The bridge, which is more than 1 mile long, spans the harbor from San Francisco to Marin County and the Redwood Highway. It was completed in 1937 at a cost of $32 million and is still one of the largest suspension bridges in the world.
Number 43. What is the main purpose of this talk? Number 44. According to the tour guide, what was the settlement called before it was renamed San Francisco? Number 45. According to the tour guide, What happened in 1848? Number 46. How long is the Golden Gate Bridge? Questions 47 through 50. Listen to a talk by a college instructor in an English class.
So many different kinds of writing have been called essays, it is difficult to define exactly what an essay is. Perhaps the best way is to point out 4 characteristics that are true of most essays. First, an essay is about one topic. It does not start with one subject and digress to another and another. Second, although a few essays are long enough to be considered a small book, most essays are short. 500 words is the most common length for an essay. Third, an essay is written in prose, not poetry. True, Alexander Pope did call 2 of his poems essays, but that word is part of a title. And after all, the essay on man and the essay on criticism really are not essays at all. They are long poems. Fourth, and probably most important, an essay is personal. It is the work of one person whose purpose is to share a thought, idea, or point of view. Let me also state here that since an essay is always personal, the term personal essay is redundant. Now, taking into consideration all of these characteristics, perhaps we can now define an essay as a short prose composition with a personal viewpoint that discusses one topic. With that in mind, let's brainstorm some topics for your first essay assignment.
Number 47. What is the instructor defining? Number 48. What is the main point of the talk? Number 49. According to the talk, which of the characteristics are not true of an essay? Number 50. What will the students probably do as an assignment? This is the end of the PBT model test.